Welcome to Beg to Differ, the Bulwark's weekly roundtable discussion featuring civil conversation across the political spectrum from center left to center right. I'm Mona Charan, syndicated columnist and policy editor at the Bulwark, and I'm joined by our regulars, Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution and the Wall Street Journal, Linda Chavez of the Niskanen Center, and Damon Linker of The Week. We are delighted to welcome as our special guest this week, Maya MacGuineas, President of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And we want to talk about being responsible with our budgeting because right now we are on the verge of the Congress is on the verge of considering a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. So first things first, Maya, I want to start with you because um, does the very term stimulus seem misplaced? I mean, one of the points that critics have made is that we don't need to stimulate the economy. The economy will bounce back as soon as the COVID crisis is over. People aren't even spending money from the last stimulus. Many, wealthier people aren't because they need to wait for the virus to be conquered before they can resume economic activity.
Yeah, first, great to be with all of you. I really love listening to the show, and it's always nice to join you all. Absolutely. This isn't stimulus because, in the traditional sense, because this is in no way an economic downturn in the traditional sense. Basically, we had to shut down the economy in order to fight the pandemic. And I think really the way to think about all of this is it's a bridge loan to get to the other side. Well, not a loan, a grant, but it's
Yeah.
a bridge to get to the other side of back when we can open up the economy. And luckily, all signs are that when we do that, the recovery in most sectors is going to be quite strong. There's actually going to be a lot of pent up demand. And so I think it's getting from here to there that is the issue right now. And then we'll see whether there has to be stimulus or recovery measures that fill in gaps in industries and areas that have been disrupted more permanently. But right now, this is really providing, first and foremost, money to continue to fight the pandemic in whatever way might be necessary, and relief for those who need it. But as we should talk about more, there's a lot more in terms of targeting to make sure those dollars are actually going to where it should to create those, to achieve those objectives that could and should be done.
So let me ask you something. Have you, I mean, you have a number of substantive critiques of this proposed spending. You have it, it's on your website and so forth. Um, are you getting a receptive audience from any Democrats on the Hill or in the Biden administration?
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly, there were many COVID bills before, and the feeling, including our own at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, was let's just get the money into the economy. Everybody knows it's not going to be spent perfectly or anywhere close, but this is a real emergency. We are slamming the brakes on the economy. Let's make sure that we can fill in those holes and get the money out there. And there was broad based bipartisan support, and that was terrific.
Hmm.
This moment is different in that the economy is starting to look strong and the course of the pandemic is starting to look optimistic. Knock on wood, fingers crossed, because who knows. But that means, given the fact that we put so much money in the economy already, and there's still quite a bit of money that hasn't even gone out and had the positive effects that it likely will,
You
there
mean from the previous COVID
from the
bills?
previous, that's right. There's still hundreds of billions of dollars that hasn't worked its way through the economy yet. And so, yes, you are absolutely starting to hear concerns from people about both the size of the bill and the need for better targeting. The unfortunate thing is that now it's breaking into partisan camps. And this, we all know this is not the way that Washington can get real policy done, where it's Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other side. And it's confusing because it happens to coincide with the change of a new president, where I think Democrats rightly would like to work with the administration and get something strong out there, and Republicans are feeling less pressure to do so than they did when it was a Republican president. So that the real chance of bipartisanship seems much more difficult than it did before. That would be by far the best way to do it. And yes, there are certainly Democrats who I think rightly are saying, I want this bill. And they say this, it's better to go too big than too small. And I'm going to support this bill. but I do think it should be targeted in a much better way. You are hearing that more and more as people are digging into the bill and seeing how many of the resources could be spent in more targeted ways.
Linda, do you think it's that they are worried about the analogy from 2009 where they felt like they didn't go far enough and that caused the Obama administration problems? And of course, the situations are radically different now, but they're worried about, as Maya said, they're worried better to go too big than too small. They feel like they went too small then. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's, as some people suggest, that this is a Democratic wish list? It's got all kinds of spending for states and localities that they wouldn't necessarily be able to get under other circumstances, along with a lot of other stuff in this bill that is a kind of a Democratic wish list. What do you think?
Well, I think the latter. I wish I didn't have to think that, but I do. I think, it is a typical Democratic response was let's just throw a lot of money at a bunch of problems and hope that some of it does some good. And it's likely that some of it will, but it's also likely, I think, that there will be some waste. And abuse, and we'll be spending money that, eventually we have to pay for. I mean, that's the problem. On the other hand, I think that there has not been much of an interest on the part of Republicans to say, well, let's try and figure out the way they did the last time at the end of the Trump administration with the last relief bill, where you got a group of Democrats and Republicans to get together and to propose a smaller package, but one that ultimately passed. You're not seeing that kind of real bipartisanship, and a lot of that has to do with Republicans feeling like they have no power, and the only way they're going to get power is to be able to win control of one of the two chambers of Congress, and that simply playing along with the Democrats is not going to get them there, and in fact could end up having backlash for some. So I think there's just not a whole lot of incentive to make this bipartisan, and the Democrats are, I think, coming up with a wish list of everything they'd like to see, including, of course, the federal minimum wage, which um, frankly, I'm not opposed to the idea of coming up with a new federal minimum wage. Maybe it won't be 15 hours initially. It will take time to get there. It hasn't been updated in a very long time, but you don't necessarily have to have it in this bill. And the same for everything, having to do with pensions and pension contributions and other things that are in this bill. So I would hope that at some point it's going to get serious and Democrats are not going to just ram this through with only Democratic votes. I think that would be a big mistake for Democrats and would be a huge mistake for the Biden administration.
Um, Bill, leaving aside the merits of the legislation for just a second, do you think it was a political error for for the Biden administration to not seek to negotiate with the Republican senators who approached them with an alternative suggestion, including Romney and Collins?
Uh, I'm not sure how big a mistake it was to do it this way this time. It would be a huge mistake to do it again. Uh, my conversations with a lot of Democrats have persuaded me that they saw this as an extension of an emergency, and that they still needed to respond to facts on the ground with that emergency mindset. And secondly, they did not want to hamstring the administration in its first major legislative initiative. Uh, the administration, I think, felt that time was of the essence with this first bill, and that they had to pay the price of a single party bill in order to get it through in the time allotted. Whether they were right or wrong in that judgment, I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. Uh, so, will this be a political blow to the administration? No, I don't. I don't think so. Does it mean that Republicans will write off the administration and abandon all further cooperation with it? I don't think that either. But I do believe that if they use reconciliation to jam through the Build Back Better bill, the infrastructure bill, in the summer or the fall, that would be, for Republicans, proof positive that the administration was not serious about governing in a two-party fashion.
Maya, yeah. First of all, you have a response, and then when you're finished, I'd love for you to comment on the inflation risk, if any.
Yeah. So I wanted to sort of agree on what Linda was saying, that this is a bill that, in addition to having a lot of good ideas that could be targeted better, is also a receptacle for a lot of Democratic wish lists of policies that they were thinking about and wanted before COVID even hit. And that does include minimum wage, which it's complicated to put in when you're still in a recession, could be very counterproductive, to the pension bailout, which is egregious, frankly, and doesn't belong there at all, to some policies that one might be sympathetic to. I think looking at, well, certainly solving the objective of child poverty in this country is one of the very top priorities there is, and the child tax credit may well be the right way to do that. So it might belong in the tax policy or the tax code, but it certainly doesn't belong in the COVID emergency bill. So you should remove those things. But I want to just add another complicating factor, which does exist, which is there are a lot of Democrats who say, yeah, we're putting in our wish list into this bill and passing on reconciliation, just like the Republicans passed a $2 trillion tax cut that wasn't paid for. In fact, when the economy was strong and we should have been bringing our debt down, there was really no justification for borrowing then. And while I think that leads us to a very bad outcome of wasting literally $1 trillion in resources and adding to the debt at a time when it's already so high, I'm very sympathetic to that complaint, in that when the tax cuts were being passed, our organization kept saying, oh no, not only is this bad policy to not pay for these, it's going to make it so much more difficult to do good policy going forward. And
Yep.
we are in that moment. So I just wanted to add that element, that that's part of the dynamic that's going on, where Democrats are saying, well, they got ours. Now we want ours. We want ours. And I just think if we keep trying to make policy in that approach, we are going to have really bad detrimental policies. To your point about inflation, there's many reasons to be concerned about short-term inflation, putting so much money in the economy when there's probably going to be a bigger demand than supply. I do think it's more of a short-term worry. I'm no expert on inflation. Nobody really knows. But I think what I'm more worried about is these asset bubbles that we're really seeing popping up throughout the economy. Low interest rates, this much money. There are a lot of things that are going to keep driving up assets, which bubbles are bad for stability, and they also
Mm,
contribute to income inequality.
yeah. And I mean, what could possibly go wrong with like a housing bubble? I mean, um, okay, interesting. So, Damon, so one of the things that I found interesting about this whole debate is that Mitt Romney ran a piece in the Wall Street Journal, on the Wall Street Journal editorial page, where he listed his critiques of the Biden bill, and explained that what he would do differently. And it had almost a before times quality to it. I thought, yeah, back in the before times, before we went through Trump, and what Maya was just saying about how badly the Republicans just blew through any concept of fiscal responsibility, that would have been totally normal for, a leading Republican to publish his complaints in the Wall Street Journal, be taken seriously, and have a big audience. But now it feels almost like, who does Romney think the audience for this is exactly? I mean, there aren't any people well, are there? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Are there fair-minded people out there who really want to evaluate policy on the merits and are not just going to do this in a red jersey, blue jersey way?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you mean other than on this podcast, I guess.
Yeah.
There probably are a few, but I would say that that Romney is really impressing me in the sense that he is getting some traction with all of these proposals that are coming out. I mean, I'm not talking about the op-ed in particular. I mean, above all, the child benefit proposal that we talked about on here a couple of weeks ago, which is not only in and of itself a remarkable move for a Republican to propose, but also is an interesting kind of negotiation with the Biden administration over its own proposals. It kind of ups the ante with the Democrats in a way that could set up very productive negotiations down the line, I think. So that's productive. And then this last week, Romney and Tom Cotton came out with a very interesting, smaller minimum wage hike proposal that has it keyed to using E-Verify to make it much more difficult for businesses to hire undocumented immigrants. Now, there are going to be a lot of Democrats who aren't going to want to go for that at all, and they're, of course, going to blanch at the much lower floor on the minimum wage proposal there. But again, it shows that there is some, I think, potentially very fruitful work going on in trying to figure out how to maybe address problems. How unusual is that? So, I mean, in that respect, it isn't just that Romney op-ed; it's these other initiatives that Romney is floating out there, that they are getting some traction. That Democrats, in response to some of what Romney has proposed, aren't immediately saying, "Oh, of course, you idiot Republicans and your hatred of all human beings except the super rich would propose such a thing," and then laughing it out of town. They're actually saying, "Well, this is really interesting. We don't really agree with all of this. Especially on the child benefit proposal, the way he proposes to pay for it, Democrats aren't thrilled with, but." There's a conversation going on that does remind us of the before times, but it's actually happening. And that is something that gives me a bit of hope here. Now, what doesn't give me much hope is Josh Hawley's proposal, which I don't know if we want to get into the nitty gritty of that. But he also had a proposal this week, which, hey, although I don't favor really what he's proposing there on an alternative to a minimum wage hike, but I will say that it is another idea being floated out there from a conservative Republican. And just having it out there, it's like, it's another position that inevitably has implications on everybody else's positions, because there is an alternative out there for discussion and debate. So these are, I think, modestly positive signs.
Okay, Maya, I'm going to give you the last word, and I know you're going to be leaving us after this segment, but I want to just give you the chance to say, like, what are some of your top objectives with reforming this bill and making it a more, a better bill? If the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget could get a short wish list, what would be on it?
Oh, good. I love pretending that the things that we wanted could actually happen. But I mean, first, this should not be a train for other unrelated policies, ones that I might support or not. Let's remove the unrelated policies, because it undermines the integrity of emergency bills, which this clearly is if done right. Second, we should right size the state and local spending, because we're giving much more money than the states even need. Many states are doing well. Some of them are already planning tax cuts. When it comes to targeting, we should not be giving money to any state, company, or family that's doing better through the COVID year than they were before, right? Let's target the money to those who actually got harmed. There are plenty of them, and they really need that help. So we should improve the state and local spending. We should definitely switch the rebates, which are, quite honestly, they should be dropped completely. They're a political promise, and unemployment is a much better way to do this money. And when it comes to unemployment, assuming the economy gets stronger, the $400 that the Biden administration would like to put in, the bonus weekly, should start lower than that, and it should be tapered down as the unemployment situation starts to improve, so that it doesn't create a disincentive to go back to work. And finally, it's premature to talk about dealing with the national debt, not talk about it. It's premature to do anything, but we should start to talk about it, because the real risk is that on the future reconciliation bills, there's trillions more in borrowing. Nobody wants to pay for anything. Every excuse is pulled out of thin air. And we need to agree that once the economy is strong enough, we will pivot back to both paying for new initiatives and figuring out how to get the debt back on a sustainable path. It's not the most urgent problem now, but I have to stress, it underlies our ability to deal with every big problem on the horizon, whether it's geopolitical competition, whether it's technological changes, the future of work. And our indebtedness is really going to become a massive threat connected to all the other issues we are dealing with in what I hope will soon be the post COVID world. So we can't forget that piece as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that and for joining us. And we look forward to having you back very soon.
Thanks so much. So nice to be with all of you. Take care.
Okay. Bye, Maya. All right. So, and let me just add a quick footnote to what Maya said about, money that is not being spent on other things. One other area that really, I mean, there's actually some of this in the bill itself, but we're going to need to think about much more spending in the future on preventing other or preparing for, not preventing, but preparing for other potential catastrophes and emergencies. We just had last week, we talked about what happened in Texas. And, there are just a lot of things that we could be spending more money on mitigation. So that's also something to think about. All right, let us now turn to the proposal that was made by Nancy Pelosi for a January 6th commission. Bill Galston, first of all, she says it should contain 7 Democrats and 4 Republicans. Is that a recipe for success?
Depends on how you define success. If you define success as a report that only one party will take seriously and only 52% of the country will take seriously, then yes, it's a perfect formula. But as many people have pointed out, a a preferable model for success, broadly conceived, would be a fully bipartisan commission with an equal representation of both political parties and chairs and co-chairs drawn from both political parties in equal numbers, and a pledge that Tom Kaine and come on, Bill.
Lee Hamilton.
Thank you. 75-year-old memory lock.
Happens to me all the time.
Saved by a younger woman, as always. To have only joint media appearances. So I think that unfortunately Speaker Pelosi has gotten the conversation off on the wrong foot, and I'm not sure why she did and how she would justify it.
So, Linda, so Speaker Pelosi probably set the wrong tone, but I can also imagine, can't you, that the current Republican leadership might want to appoint people like Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz to such a commission and make a complete clown show out of it?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't see them appointing Liz Cheney, for example, to such a commission.
It would help if they only chose retired.
I was just going to say, I think that's part of the problem. The idea that you're going to have members of Congress doing this, I think it's a bad idea. I think it ought to be people who are elder statesmen, if you will. It would be people who might have had elective or even appointed office, might even be former judges. And I think the whole idea of having it bipartisan pretty much requires that you have something like an even split, a 50-50 split. And I love Bill's idea, and of course it is more applicable to, from the 9/11 Commission, that you have the co-chairs and the members of such a commission speak with one voice, never to speak individually. What we don't want to see, and I think what Pelosi's recommendation would end up with, is a commission report that finds certain facts and a minority report that essentially tries to bypass those facts,
Hmm.
and in which there is absolutely no agreement on how to prevent it from happening in the future. And I think that would be a disaster. I think it would make matters worse. And that is exactly what we do not want to do. And of course, it's easier when you have a foreign attack. If you have a bunch of foreign extremists wreak havoc and kill Americans, it's easier to get Americans to pull together and to be united as one people and not to be playing partisan roles than if you have an event which was in fact driven by the kind of partisan rancor that has existed now for it precedes Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was elected in part because it preceded him, but certainly has been there at least for the last decade. And so what they're proposing to do is not going to help.
Um, Damon, Linda says that it's easier to pull together when you're attacked by a foreign entity, which is of course true. But I would just footnote that by saying the degree of rancor and bitterness between us in this country has gotten to the point now where I kind of wonder if even an attack by uh, an outside entity would bring us together. I mean, there would be opportunities for both sides to say, but you caused this because you let down your guard or whatever. I mean, and by the way, there was a little bit of that after 9/11. I mean, I remember one very, very tense bit of congressional testimony by Condoleezza Rice when the Democrats raked her over the coals because there had been a PDB, a President's Daily Brief, that had supposedly, warned of an imminent attack, and it wasn't taken seriously enough by the Bush people, and they were blaming, they had Condi there to to be in the hot seat. But so there was some of that. But in general, I think most would agree that the 9/11 Commission, that was before Congress, the 9/11 Commission, with its elder statesmen and it's sort of a little bit of a remove from the hurly-burly of politics, really did, first of all, it inspired confidence. Its recommendations were almost entirely adopted. And it helped the country to process what had happened. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Damon, and ask you if you can think of people, actual names of people who could be on such a commission and serve a similar role now in light of everything that's happened in the interim.
Oh dear. The answer is no, I can't really, and that's because of my broader, sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say cynicism, although sometimes you could say that about me. But some of what Linda said, goes along the same lines with this. That I'm pretty skeptical that. Especially with this kind of a domestic thing. I mean, what we saw on the 6th of January was not a civil war, but it was in the direction of a civil war in the sense that you had the head of one party inciting an insurrection against Congress for his own advantage and egging it on. And they were clearly partisans of a kind on the side of one party against the other party. And that means that I will again be cynical enough to describe it as a pretense of a kind of objectivity that you would want from any such committee. An investigation, I think it's sort of unrealistic to expect it could be attainable to the extent that those fissures in our society remain real, and I think they do. And so in that respect, even if you tried to do the kind of right down the line, bipartisan way in which Bill described it, where you have equal numbers of people from both parties on the committee and overseeing it, and agreements about talking to the media. I mean, could you imagine Republicans in this moment agreeing that they would not go on Fox to talk about and spin their side of what this committee was doing? I think that's inconceivable. And that's not good for the country, but it is an expression of, I think, unfortunately, where we are. And then Pelosi's suggestion that it be 7-4. I mean, that really is kind of a joke. Like that's not even taking my own despair in thinking that what Bill proposed, which was absolute fairness, and thinking even that wouldn't work, let alone stacking the deck like that. I mean, if you're going to do that, why even have 4 Republicans? Why not just make it a Democratic panel that would come up with findings showing how the Republicans were behind this entirely, which is true. I mean, you could put Ben Sass and Mitt Romney on there, but of course, then the people in the Republican Party who are on the Trump side of this divide in the party would have even more of a reason to dismiss it. So we sort of go round and round in thinking this through. And I mean, one way of describing where we are as a society and its danger is that the space in our public life for institutions and people who speak in the name of the country as a whole, its laws, its norms that abide across partisan divides and over time as power shifts back and forth between the parties, is shrinking and shrinking and getting smaller and smaller. And that means there are very few people around who can be trusted by both sides. So that's a long answer to your question of who I would pick. And my answer is, how hell if I know? I guess I'd pick Tom Hanks playing a role as a bipartisan politician from 40 years ago. That's who I'd put on that commission.
Yeah. There are a number of questions that Americans want answers to, like, how did Officer Sicknick die? That's one. What caused his death? The possible involvement of some actual members of Congress in this violence and so forth. There are a lot of questions. It looks like a commission is not going to be the way to get answers to those things. There may be other way. The Justice Department is going to be investigating. Our new Attorney General, Merrick Garland, said that he does plan to make this a priority, investigating. So there is another avenue of investigation. There will be lawsuits, doubtless. Those may reveal some answers. But what the country most needs is what we cannot get, and that is, we need to convince the 75% or whatever it is of the Republican Party that the election was free and fair, and that this was the worst con job, propaganda effort, big lie, probably in maybe in all of American history, and certainly in recent American history. And it's hard to see how that can possibly happen. All right. Bill, you had a very interesting column this week that noted that President Biden spoke this past week at the Munich Security Conference and proclaimed that America is back. And you say maybe, but you want to fill in the blank?
Yeah, well, I have to start with a grandfather's story. My oldest grandson, who's now 8, is obsessed with maps and geography. He knows the capitals of every country in the world, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard to stump him with a geography question. And when my piece came out, And there was a sort of bing on his father, my son's cell phone. The following headline popped up: Biden is back, but Europe has moved. And apparently, he went to his father, gravely concerned, and said, Abba, where did Europe go?
That's good. And can
I,
we
I
get it back?
I shared that with my editor, who had some
That's funny.
who thought that my 8-year-old grandson should have recognized a metaphor when he saw one.
Tough crowd.
A very tough crowd. In any event, my column was very simple. Uh, Biden gave a sort of a meat and potatoes, America's back, let's pick up where we left off speech. Uh, he got, I would say, a polite but lukewarm response from other leaders gathered at the Munich Security Conference. Uh, French President Macron made an impassioned plea for Europe's strategic autonomy. Chancellor Merkel made it very clear that she wasn't going to toe the American line on economic issues of major importance to Germany, like the Nord Stream 2 pipeline or like the EU's recent trade treaty with China. Uh, that was not particularly surprising. What was more surprising was a survey put out within the past few weeks by the European Council on Foreign Relations, which found astonishing movement by rank and file Europeans in the direction of a Europe uh, that would be more nearly neutral between the United States and whatever enemy we chose to designate next, including China. Uh, it became clear, at least to me, on the basis of that survey, that the damage that the Trump administration did to our global leadership was more than superficial. And that's the case because Europeans' perception of the guardrails that used to hem in American political oscillation has now broadened. They do not believe that simply because Joe Biden uh, defeated Donald Trump, that the threat of right wing populism taking power in the United States again has gone away. Not at all. They think it's a real and present possibility. And they don't think they can rely on the United States the way they used to be able to be the stabilizing force in times of political turmoil. This is, and it's not clear to me whether this perception of a less reliable American public is going to be corrected quickly. Maybe not at all. So this is a permanent price that we've paid. I could go into greater detail, but that's the gist of it.
Linda, can you blame them? Europeans look at us, and this is not about Trump per se. It's about the fact that the American people elected him, and so the Europeans are saying to themselves, "This country is not one that we think that we can rely on. The next election might bring a similar character into power." Linda, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
No.
That's right. I think they are more worried about the American people than they have been in the past. But I would also suggest that this didn't, again, just start 5 years ago with the campaign and election of Donald Trump. The United States has been an unreliable partner, and I think going back even to the era of Vietnam and other times when we we have backed out of areas where we were very committed, often after pulling others in with us into conflicts. And certainly we saw that during the Obama years with respect to Afghanistan and Iraq. And so I think that it isn't so much a partisan issue as it is that America has seemed in recent years um, as being less sure of itself and its role in the world and its standing in the world, and our leaders have exemplified that. And so if we're not sure of ourselves, why should others have faith in us? So I think this is not just a product of the Trump years. I think this goes to a bigger question about America's role in the world. And certainly, as Bill suggested in his column, the European sense that China is the growing dominant force in the world is, experienced in a lot of areas. Certainly, the economy of China has been very vibrant. China has not in the past proved itself to be, interested in some kind of hegemony in the world, but they are now much more interested in having influence in parts of the world where they haven't before. And so all of this really means that you're seeing America's role in the world as being challenged.
Damon, there was a piece in the Times by a guy named Stephen Wertheim, who writes that the U.S. should not be back, should not want to be back, should not play a large role in world affairs, except on two issues: climate change and fighting global pandemics. I don't think you go quite that far, but what's your reaction to all of this?
Well, I'm a realist in foreign policy, which means that my take on it might in some ways overlap with like Stephen Wertheim's position. He's a very smart guy and an accomplished historian of American foreign affairs. So I like him and his work, but we don't really see eye to eye on things like what you just described. I mean, the United States is the most powerful nation on the planet in all kinds of ways still. And we need to think about our role in the world from that baseline. You don't just say, from now on, we'll act totally different, as if we're not the most powerful nation on the planet. And that would imply, backing away from security commitments all over the world if all we're going to care about is climate change and kind of public health initiatives. So that I don't think makes much sense. That would create vacuums, and there would be provocations of bad behavior on the part of countries all over the world if we did that. So obviously that can't be the way forward in my view. At the same time, I think what Bill talked about in his column and Linda picked up on about Europe is absolutely correct. And what I would add as an emphasis, which neither of them really spent much time talking about, is Iraq and the Bush administration, and the fact that from Europe's point of view, the fact that the Bush administration went to war in Iraq over the objections of pretty much every country on the continent except for Spain.
Well, and Britain, if you count them as your...
Well, I said continent, so I wasn't counting Great Britain. But if we're talking about Europe, and especially now post-Brexit, that means the continent of Europe. They did not think that was a good idea. They feel very vindicated in having thought so. And so that means that when Biden goes over there and says, America's back, they say, you know what? I think I heard that before 12 years ago when Barack Obama became president and his message was America's back. And they believed him, so much so that they kind of behaved a little silly and gave him a Nobel Peace Prize and all this kinds of stuff to kind of make it seem as if they're like anticipating the greatness that would come from this. And what did Obama do? He, among other things, he joins the Paris Climate Accord. He works for years to get a nuclear arms deal with Iran. And then the country elects Trump, who makes Bush, from Europe's point of view, look like, a Metternich, like a great statesman who forged some kind of world peace. So now Trump is this monster who seems to be tearing up everything. He tears up the Iran deal. He tears up or pulls the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord and kind of goes, and bumper cars around, crashing into everything in the world for 4 years. And now Biden's there saying America's back. And how, of course, Europe is going to say, yeah, well, how about let's see for a while? Because Obama was president for 8 years. So even if Biden and or Kamala Harris or whoever it ends up being is president for 8 years, that doesn't mean that 8 years from now we're not going to turn around and elect like whatever Trump part 2 or whoever that ends up being, who goes in a radically different direction. That isn't a statement about America being weak. It's a statement about us being incredibly unreliable. And reliability really matters for things like a liberal international order, which is what Europe is talking about when it speaks about whether or not it can really treat America as the leader of that.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add. I agree with all that, except to say that some of those surveys from Europe and even the comments of some of the leaders strike me as a little cold. I mean, this idea that, well, the US is unreliable, which I completely agree, we have been, means that we're going to be neutral as between the US and China, say, or as between the US and any potential conflict with Russia. Well, hold on a second. I mean, I thought Europe was supposed to be upholding certain liberal international ideas as well. And certainly, as between the United States and those two countries, doesn't seem to me to be that tough a choice to say, well, the US aligns far more with our values. And you don't hear them saying that, which is annoying. All right. We now come to Linda. Yes. Did you want to add
Yeah,
something?
I just was going to say that I think part of the problem is the NATO alliance, which I think Trump did a great deal to damage, and mostly by the way he talked, not so much by what he did. That as the sort of driving force that has united not just Europe, but obviously United States, Canada, and the UK, that I think too has been one of the big problem areas. So, what becomes of NATO going forward, I think is going to matter a great deal in terms of what role the United States plays in the world.
Okay. Since you've reminded me of it, I'm just going to get on my hobby horse one more time on the one subject, which is this was a bipartisan failure that, was both Hillary Clinton and Trump in 2016 announced that they were opposed to the TPP, which was the obvious way for the United States to both be tough on China and improve our international standing and our world leadership and be good for the world's poor in terms of creating more opportunities for everyone as well as the wealthier countries. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was a no-brainer. That was the way to go. Both of our political parties said, nope, we're not into that anymore. And so now we've actually handed China a great gift in terms of trade and influence around the world and harmed our own international standing. All right. Climbing down off my soapbox, let us now turn to our final topic, our highlight or lowlight that we would like to emphasize. So, Linda, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I have some very great news, and that is the proclamation that was signed by President Biden on February 24th, a proclamation revoking many of the changes that President Trump had put into effect that essentially ground to a halt legal immigration to the United States. He, of course, used the pandemic and the struggling economy, he meaning President Trump, to halt immigrants of all sorts, including anything but the closest family members of those who are already here, halting any people who are in the so-called lottery system, halting the immigration of certain kinds of temporary workers who were on various work visas. And essentially what President Biden has now done is to revoke all of those prohibitions. And I think this really does point to the fact that immigration is going to be a focus of this president. I think this was absolutely a very easy thing for him to do. It doesn't get him involved in some of the more trickier questions of, what to do about the 11 million people who are here illegally. But this allows the immigration system to function as it has for most of the last 50 years, with bringing in people who have contributed to our economy, who've become good Americans. And if we really want to recover economically, we need these people. So that was my good news for the week.
Okay, Damon.
Well, I spend probably an inordinate amount of time complaining about the New York Times in my life in general and on this podcast. But I did want to flag an example of really top-notch, first-rate journalism from the Times, showing that the place contains multitudes, and some of those multitudes are still the best you get. Michael Powell has done really great work there, doing journalism to look into examples of kind of progressive overreach around the country. And just last night, they published at the Times a long investigative piece of reporting from Powell titled "Inside a Battle Over Race, Class, and Power at Smith College." And it is just a real tour de force that does a great job of looking at this story that received some attention a couple of years ago of a black student at Smith who was in a dorm she wasn't supposed to be in over the summer, went into an area where she wasn't supposed to be in, and security was called. There were no weapons brandished or anything. It was all, at the moment, seemingly pretty polite. But this student ended up making a series of accusations about being a target of racism, and it resulted in the security officer who showed up, plus a woman in the dining hall who originally said something about it, to be accused of being racist, and the president of the college not doing anything to defend them, the ACLU getting involved with charges, and Powell just very meticulously and with the great care that great journalists display, really just digs into this story and unravels it piece by piece, so that by the end you just see that really nobody did anything wrong here from the very beginning, and people have been punished and their lives have been overturned due to a kind of hysteria that is distressingly common these days. So it's a great story about an important subject, and the fact that it's published in the Times is very, very good.
Could not agree more. Would love to, underline that. Also recommend it. I have a tiny tickle in the back of my brain saying, I wonder if Powell's going to face blowback from some of his younger colleagues at the New York Times, considering the atmosphere there lately. So I'm a little concerned, but
I would say I don't have any deep information from behind the scenes, but the little that I do, the people that I know there, as I joked at the beginning of what I was saying about the multitudes at the Times, it is a huge place, and the kind of woke younger people who are stirring up a lot of the trouble there are still just a portion of the staff. There are a lot of powerful people there who are not happy about how things have been unfolding, and I think Powell has some protection. So
I hope so, because there's another thing that dawned this week at the Times, where they announced that they're going to be taking all kinds of efforts to make people more comfortable who might not be comfortable at the Times, and it was sounding very much like they were trying to make the woke people more comfortable rather than good journalists. But we'll see.
we'll see. Yes.
Yeah. Um, okay, Bill.
Well, this is funny because my item too praises the Times. Uh, we discussed earlier in this show Mitt Romney's proposal uh, to help children, a counter proposal to the Biden proposal. To my absolute astonishment, uh, the Times ran a long editorial saying, in effect, Democrats, you have something to learn from Romney's proposal. Take it seriously. Uh, Considering the editorial line that the Times has taken about just about everything in recent years, I could hardly believe it.
Hmm.
I'm not sure whether to be encouraged by it or not, but it is a fact that it appeared, and I think that itself deserves to be noticed.
Oh, I didn't know about that. I missed that one. So at least on the basis of your report, I'm encouraged. So that's good. That's good. All right. Well, I would like. There were so many things I could have chosen this week. It was a very, very full list. But including the fact that if you missed it, you got to go watch the Perseverance land on Mars. Some of the most amazing footage
Stunning,
ever.
absolutely stunning.
Right? Yes.
I thought they were simulations when I saw
I
them.
know, it was amazing. It was so clear and just remarkable. And
Could
what an accomplishment!
could I just interrupt here because it's I
Yeah.
think it's so funny. My husband and I were watching it live, and we texted our sons and said, "Get the grandkids to turn on the TV now." And we were met with a guffaw by our grown children who said, "People don't care about watching things live today." So it just, having watched the moon landing when my oldest son was a babe in arms,
Mm.
that broke my heart.
Oh, well, I hope that they really appreciate it though when they watch it on, on video, whatever. Okay. But that's not my item. My item is Jonathan Rauch writing in The Atlantic. Really good piece called The Five Trump Amendments to the Constitution. Obviously informal amendments, but he sort of analyzes what the Trump presidency meant for some of the norms, and he goes through them, and I think really they're spot on. That impeachment is now pretty much a dead letter if you can keep your party in line, that congressional oversight is notional, that well, there are five of them. I won't go through all of them, just to point out that it's available on The Atlantic and highly recommended.
It was excellent, and that piece began as a series of tweets from Jonathan a couple of weeks ago, and when he tweeted them out, I retweeted them and said excellent thread. So I'm glad he expanded it into an article that might have a little bit longer life and reach a
that's
bigger
great.
audience.
And in further Jonathan Rauch news, he has a book coming out, and so we can expect a return visit from him in the not too distant future.
Excellent.
And with that, we thank you all for listening. Please rate and review us. Send your comments as usual to me at my email address is on the Bulwark, where you can find me. And by the way, you should also subscribe to the Bulwark Plus, because you get all kinds of other free stuff. I mean, other great offerings, not free, but great offering. This is free, and Charlie's podcast is free. But if you subscribe to Bulwark Plus, if you become a member, you get the Secret podcast with Sarah Longwell and JVL, which is fantastic, and a bunch of other things, including the great pop culture podcast with Sunny Bunch. So anyway, it's really worth it. And we do these live streams once a week on Thursday nights. That is just for members. So highly recommended that you join. And then also, as I say, I'm always open to feedback about this podcast. I try to respond to as many of your emails as I possibly can, but I don't always get to all of them. Depends on how my week is going, but I do read them all. So thank you all. And we will be back next week as every week.